for tuning into the first episode of the Mayhem Melting Pot, a mostly true crime podcast that does not discriminate when it comes to the type of story that we cover. Also included will be stories of like conspiracy theories, scandals, little known historical incidents, and the like. This podcast is researched, recorded, and produced solely by me, your Mayhem host. I am not affiliated with any law enforcement agency. I am not a journalist. I am simply an individual who can't stop talking about true crime. So I'm starting this podcast as a platform that allows me to do so constructively. The Mayhem Melting Pot podcast will release a regular weekly episode on Mondays, along with some surprise bonus content mixed in from time to time. Feel free to refer to the show notes for more information on how you can contact or support this podcast. Without further ado, I will now begin episode 1. The following story contains graphic details of sexual assault, physical and sexual assault, abuse of a child, torture, and extreme violence. Listener discretion is highly advised. In June 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that youthful offenders cannot have a life without parole sentence imposed upon them for anything less than murder. One might venture to wonder, or maybe overthink, about this legislation. The majority of crimes committed by minors probably aren't heinous enough to justify a life sentence. Generally speaking, a man so young can be rehabilitated and molded and thus won't be a threat to society for the duration of their entire adult lives, right? But what if a manor or a group of manors were found to be responsible for adult levels of shocking depravity? What if a manor committed said acts against another manor? What if the damage done to the victims resulted in injuries to the body that can never be reversed? Not just broken bones or missing teeth, but chemically induced cancer. Should any person, despite age, be released back into society after such devastating inflictions? The story I've chosen for the premiere episode of this podcast explores all of these talking points mentioned.
It was a crime that definitely shocked law enforcement and also residents living in this neighborhood.
We didn't know whether they was going to come and try the same thing with us. It was treacherous. It was heartless. How would you not remember it?
14.
Police say Avion confessed, but showed no remorse at a crime so debased that even hardened detectives were sickened. According to police, 14-year-old Avion Lawson and 9 other young teenagers tortured the woman victim and her son for quite a while inside their apartment.
Sick and twisted. That's how the father of a teen charged with gang rape describes the situation.
That teenager made his first appearance in court today. Terry Parker joins us live with more on tonight's big story. Terry?
Nathan Walker is the second teen arrested for the home invasion and gang rape of a West Palm Beach woman and the assault on her preteen son. His father had quite a bit to say about how his son could be involved.
The Dunbar Village housing project was built in 1939, 2 years after the Federal Housing Act of 1937. Specifically built to house African Americans, Dunbar Village was named after African American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. Described in news articles as grassy and tree-lined, surrounded by an 8-foot-tall iron fence, and with 246 units in a linear barrack style, situated upon 17 acres. Per the 2000 U.S. Census, 60% of the households in that area were below the poverty line. Only 19% of the adults in that area had high school diplomas. The average rent at Dunbar Village was $150. In 2007, the year that this crime takes place, the police were called to Dunbar Village a total of 717 times, an average of twice daily. On June 18, 2007, a brutal crime that led to the destruction of Dunbar Village as it stood took place. Around 9 p.m., several masked intruders forced their way into the back door of Building 1843, Unit 2. For upwards of 3 hours, the residents, a 35-year-old Haitian immigrant and single mother, and her 12-year-old son, would endure unthinkable brutality. Fortunately, the two would go on to survive the ordeal, but they will forever have the memories that traumatize and haunt them. Today, we want to talk about the story of the Dunbar Village rape case. A young man with dreadlocks knocked on Marie's back door. When she answered the door, the boy told her she had two flat tires on her SUV that was parked in front of the house. Marie went around to verify this, but didn't see anything wrong with her vehicle. On her way back to the back door, she asked the boy why he told her she had flat tires when she didn't. He offered a vague explanation and apologized. Marie then went to re-enter her home via the back door. Upon doing so, she was ambushed by several masked intruders, two of whom were armed, one with an AK-47 and another with a .45 caliber handgun. They forced her into her home and repeatedly demanded cash. She told them she had no cash to give. Eventually, the attacker, armed with the AK-47, grabbed Marie and forced her upstairs into the bedroom. He told her to remove her nightgown. She refused. He ripped it from her and threw her nude body into the bed, beginning what will be a few hours of sexual assault. The other attackers entered the room. They rotated, took turns, two at a time. The other intruders laughed and cheered them on. While she was being assaulted, her 12-year-old son was in the next room, being beat and hit. Not only was the victim raped and sodomized by multiple attackers multiple times, she was also raped with an object, the gun, the AK-47, along with an electric nose razor that the intruders found in her bedroom. At some point, Marie was forced into the bathtub to be cleaned, rid of DNA evidence that the intruders may have left behind on her body. Her son was also brought into the bathroom, stripped naked. They smashed a plate over his head, threw light bulbs at him. At gunpoint, they forced Marie to her knees and demanded that she assault her own 12-year-old son. In a further attempt to destroy DNA evidence, they poured bleach and other household cleaning chemicals onto the mother and child. They poured bleach directly into the eyes of the child. They threw a wooden bookshelf on top of the bathtub that held their new victims, announcing their plans to burn them alive. The group ransacked the home looking for a lighter, and in the only stroke of luck the victims had that night, the intruders couldn't find a lighter. They fled. They stole minor household items. I think maybe a cell phone, a PlayStation, and I think she said some jewelry, minor things. Things she probably wishes they would have just taken. Um, this is just it's wow. After they left, Marie listened out to make sure they were gone. After what seemed like several moments, one of the attackers returned. He let Marie back into her bedroom, where he assaulted her one final time. Before leaving, he did something very strange. He gave her a name and wrote down an address and handed her the slip of paper and said, "You can find me here." And he ran off and joined his accomplices. Once she was sure the attackers were gone, sure this time, Marie went to the landline to phone for help, only to realize it had been ripped from the wall. Together, the mother and child made their way on foot to a nearby hospital. Initially, Marie was still too afraid to contact police because her attackers told her if she contacted the police, they would kill her. But she was informed by the hospital personnel that she was required to report the crime in order to receive treatment, which obviously compelled her to report the crime. It didn't take long for police to come up with the suspects, as they left a bunch of DNA and fingerprints at the scene, despite their futile efforts to clean it up and destroy evidence. The first to be arrested was 14-year-old Avion Lawson. He was born November 4th, 1992. He was the youngest of anybody on the scene that day. He left his DNA inside a condom at the crime scene at Marie's house. So, you know, no explaining that. He had no business there. He wasn't an official resident of Dunbar Village at the time. He was staying there with his grandmother, Johnny Mae Wilkerson, who, needless to say, following this incident and Avion's arrest, was evicted because he was her company. And usually, when you live in projects or housing complexes like this, if you have a guest and something happens, especially if they are on a release and they were living there, usually that results in eviction efforts. So he got his grandma evicted. 5 years earlier, a 9-year-old Avion witnessed his older sister, Tiffany Parker, stab her boyfriend to death during an argument, a crime for which she would only go on to serve 10 years probation for. That's not to say that his sister wasn't justified. I mean, I don't know. More than likely, she only got probation because this argument was physical and the guy put his hands on her. So she was more than likely justified in killing him. But as a 9-year-old, all Avion saw was, oh, she killed him and she didn't go to jail. You know, his mind probably at the time didn't comprehend, oh, what was justified. So, just for a little perspective. So Avion had a pretty troubled upbringing. His family, he was known amongst his family members to be troubled. Jacars Taylor was born September 16th, 1991. He was known in Dunbar Village to be a close friend of Avion Lawson. In fact, the two together, along with three other teenagers, were charged in January 2007, 6 months prior to this crime we're talking about here. They were charged of beating up and robbing a man, taking his bicycle. I don't have any details on that other than it was an incident that happened because, they were juveniles, so still. Taylor was also linked via DNA evidence found at the scene and arrested in what is described in court documents as a rough arrest. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it said that he resisted arrest when they went to arrest him at his home. And he had a younger brother there, I think maybe like a 10 or 9-year-old brother. So that was pretty traumatizing for him to have to see because, Jakars fought them. So they threw him to the ground and put their knee in his back in front of the little boy. He's probably standing there crying, screaming. It's probably pretty traumatizing for him. So Avion's grandmother and Jakars' younger brother are two. They're also victims here. Obviously not as much, but they also suffer as a result of the behavior of their relatives. Taylor's mother, Jacqueline Miner, expressed public disgust not only at the crime, but at her son's involvement in the crime. Quote, if you're involved in this, I hope you see those victims every night when you close your eyes. Unquote. She said this publicly to her 15-year-old son. Nathan Antonio Walker Jr. was born on October 12, 1990, making him 16 years old at the time of his arrest, which was a result of his fingerprints being found at the scene. His parents, Nathan Sr. and Ruby Nell Walker, married a few months after his birth, according to Palm Beach County family court documents. Despite this, Nathan Sr. was mostly absent from his household and from his son's life. Records show several evictions as well as petty crimes associated with Ruby's name in Palm Beach County. So once again, pretty unstable. It's pretty probably unstable upbringing, having to move all the time. And who knows who took care of him when his mom was in trouble. So, according to his parents, Nathan was borderline mentally retarded, unable to read and write, and dropped out of school after failing the 7th grade 3 times. Nathan was also known to be an associate of Avion and Jakar's. Fourth suspect arrested, Tommy Lee Poindexter II, was born on January 13th, 1989, making him 18 years old at the time he was involved in this crime. He was the first child to be born addicted to crack cocaine in Palm Beach County, according to his mother, Harriet Rogers. In 1991, Tommy and 3 of his siblings were removed from their mother's custody after she abandoned them to run the streets. Tommy would split time between an abusive grandmother who would, quote unquote, beat him silly, and a father who was also on drugs and a neglectful, unfit parent. Tommy was described by family as polite, quiet, and respectful when he wasn't acting out. Masterson Poindexter, Tommy's older brother, told the Palm Beach County Post in an October 2009 interview, quote, we taught him bad things were good. If he committed a crime, we taught him it was good. We laughed, unquote. According to his mother, Tommy attempted suicide in 2005, and shortly before this crime, he was prescribed Zoloft. Tommy was not arrested on July 19th with his accomplices because he was already in custody for a minor traffic violation. Although those are the suspects that were arrested and charged with this crime, if you do the smallest amount of research, you'll find that there were more than 4 boys. In fact, there were at least 7, because I can verify for sure that there were 3 other individuals there, one of whom was Avion Lawson's cousin, who also allegedly provided the 2 weapons used in this crime, as well as a young man named Augustus Fontaine and Melvin Young. According to Avion's testimony at Jakar's Taylor's trial, Melvin Young was the one who handed out condoms before their arrival at the crime scene. Also, according to Avion, Augustus Fontaine allegedly referenced CSI, said something about CSI, like, yeah, we got to get rid of the DNA. I watched CSI, or something along those lines. So Melvin Young and Augustus Fontaine didn't leave any fingerprints or DNA at the scene, but we know they were both there. In fact, Augustus Fontaine showed up in front of the presiding judge, Judge Krista Marks, in 2009, 2 years after he was not charged for this crime, for another crime, I believe it was a drive-by. And Judge Krista Marks could be heard saying to a bailiff, you know who that is, right? That's Augustus Fontaine. He got off really easy on a pretty brutal crime a few years ago, and here he is back in my courtroom. At the time of this recording, it's officially been 3 days since Melvin Young was shot and killed in another Palm Beach County housing complex. So this is going to be released on the 27th. So that happened on, I think, the 24th or 5th. So, you know, that's recent. There was a little bit of outrage when Melvin and Augustus weren't charged. A lot of people accused the prosecution of being lazy and taking the easy way out. But I can kind of understand their unwillingness to charge these two young men without any DNA evidence and solely on the word of Avion Lawson, who he is he's a liar, and I guess it's hard for him to. He's not a good liar, and we'll talk more about that a little later. In an article written on July 19th, 2007, the same day these boys were arrested, in the South Florida Sun Centennial, State Attorney Barry Kisher is said to have instructed assistant state's attorneys working on the Dunbar Village case not to negotiate with the defense and to proceed to trial to seek the highest possible sentence. Despite this order, deals were offered to three of the four suspects. Two of these deals were withdrawn in April 2009, leading to a combined trial for Jakaris Walker and Tommy Poindexter, and a trial in September 2009 for Jakaris Taylor. Avion Lawson was offered a lesser sentence in exchange for turning state's evidence and testifying against all three of his co-defendants. It is worthy to note here that prosecutors worked out a 20-year sentence in a plea deal for Tommy Poindexter, the only one to be charged as an adult. In exchange, they were to receive his cooperation not only for this case, but he had information on three unrelated homicide cases as well. His lawyer tried to file a motion to compel the prosecution to honor that deal, to no avail. Judge Krista Marks acknowledged the situation as quote-unquote sloppy work on the side of the prosecutors. However, the assistant state attorneys had already been instructed not to do any negotiating. And Judge Krista Marks told Poindexter's lawyer he should not have agreed to a deal with such vague terms. Now, I kind of think that kind of stinks. I understand this kid, what he did was horrible. What all of it, well, the incident is horrible. It's brutal. It's unspeakable. However, in this country, everybody's supposed to get a fair shake. Everybody's supposed to, the legal process is supposed to it's supposed to be set up to where as though it's supposed to give everybody a fair chance. And I don't think it's fair that they offered him this deal and then it was essentially like, no, never mind. But we'll take this information that you have, but now you can go ahead and hit the trial. So a lot of people may think it doesn't matter because of what he did, but I'm not one of those people. I think everybody should get a fair chance. We all know they don't. Moving on. Marie and Avion both testified at both trials. All three of Avion's co-defendants subsequently received life sentences. Avion Lawson was sentenced to 30 years and were required to register as a sex offender upon his release in 2037. In 2010, when the Supreme Court ruled that it is unconstitutional for a minor to receive a life sentence, Jakaris Taylor and Nathan Walker were entitled to be resentenced. So, Judge Krista Marks resentenced Walker to 60 years in prison. Rather recently, Jakaris Taylor just got his resentence settled. On February 13th, 2019, Jakaris Taylor was sentenced to 60 years plus an additional 5 years. The reason that it was an additional 5 years is because Judge Krista Marks said that she wanted the victims to be able to move on. And this is such a murky area of the law. She was referencing the law about juveniles and life sentences. She didn't want to over-sentence him and have to, in the future, look at his sentence again. Maybe it would compel the victims to have to testify again and come to all these hearings. So, in order to provide them some closure, she simply gave them an additional 5 years with a 60. The West Palm Beach County Housing Authority settled out of court for an undisclosed amount in response to a civil suit brought by the victims. I hope this undisclosed amount will be enough to take care of all of their medical bills for all of the resulting injuries that they suffered. You can easily pull up the victim's testimony. It's pretty heart wrenching if you want to listen to it. But towards the end of it, she describes her injuries, and it takes place in August of 2009, and she's saying about how she had to get a biopsy to get cancer removed because she has cervical cancer now from the chemicals they use to try to remove, I'm using air quotes, remove DNA. She partially blind. She says she can't even read. So yeah, these people were left in bad shape. So I mean, I guess at least the housing authority could do is settle out of court for not providing adequate security, because the court paper said they should have been able to foresee something like this happening. In 2017, the housing complex reopened after being demolished and rebuilt into a community for senior citizens and veterans. It is now known as the Paul Lawrence Dunbar Senior Complex. I've been following this case since it happened in 2007. The brutal details stuck with me as something I could never unthink. At no point have I ever thought these boys should receive any hint of leniency. Because I'm familiar with true crime, I knew they wouldn't receive any leniency since they were dealing with the no-nonsense justice system of the state of Florida. The only one other than the victims that I feel even deserve to be considered is Tommy Poindexter. Based on the information I've gathered, Tommy was an outsider in this group. All the other boys ran together, grew up together. If you go over the court documents and pay close attention, you will see a pattern of blame put on Tommy by the other boys. I read in at least one article that Avion Lawson told an inmate, quote, "Tommy's slow and he's definitely scared of me," unquote. Now, he said that despite him and Walker and Taylor trying to suggest that Tommy was the ringleader. Even though I only seen this in one article, it seems to ring true. Between that, Avion Lawson's demeanor on the stand, and in the despicable interview with the news station you can find on YouTube, and the fact that the guns used were facilitated via his relatives, his cousin to be exact, something tells me Avion was the ringleader. Since he was over 18 at the time, and the only one that was an adult in the group, he's not without responsibility, Tommy Poindexter. But I doubt he was a ringleader. And the fact that the prosecutors made a deal where they were given info on 3 homicides and not compelled to keep their end of the bargain, only giving them 20-year sentence. It seems egregiously unfair. Furthermore, I don't think Avion Lawson deserves the deal he received. Granted, he was just 14 years old at the time. The interview where he disingenuously refers to himself as just as much a victim that interview doesn't take place until he's 18. It's more than enough time for him to realize how trash, absolutely trash, it is for him to still not be admitting his role and taking responsibility. Sounds like a lot of adult criminals that we know. Other than that, I think the state of Florida got this case right. These boys only almost killed their victim. So a 60-year sentence of almost life seems fitting. Thanks again for joining me for the first episode of the Mayhem Melting Pot. You can show support simply by subscribing, rating, and reviewing this podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you like this pilot episode, but feel the quality could use an upgrade, or feel that it's missing something like theme music or background music, feel free to search the Mayhem Melting Pot at gmail.com on PayPal and submit a one-time donation in the amount of your choosing. I will be giving shout-outs to anyone who submits a review or donation on future episodes. The Mayhem Melting Pot can be followed on Instagram at Mayhem Pot, as well as on Twitter at Mayhem Pot.